My name is Arvin, and I've been volunteering on and off with Storks in the Annex for probably about 10 years or so. This is when I started college, and then doing a variety of things. Now they ask me to come speak every once in a while on this topic, and then I also do a series on healthy sexuality, conversations around healthy sexuality. So just a little bit of my connection to this. I do just want to preface this whole conversation because I'm trying to take a very large topic and I have like 30 minutes. So, and I usually do this talk, it's about an hour, so this is going to be kind of the highlights, but I'm hoping I can redirect you and kind of give you some handholding resources that you can then go get more information to educate yourself and kind of build up your toolbox on this topic. But I just kind of want to start off with, there are two big messages I want to make sure to get across. One, obviously you've heard Rebecca's story, you've heard from John Cho this morning. It's kind of in my experience, a lot of times when you hear about sex trafficking or abuse, it's really easy to start thinking about the young people in our lives and how we want to just put them in padded rooms and protect them from the world, because the world is, there's a lot of darkness and a lot of pain out there. But we know that's not reality. You can't do that. It's not really good for people either, because they can be empowered to take care of themselves. Obviously, not all situations they're able. I think Rebecca's story is a perfect example of how they are. A lot of these situations they have absolutely no control. So part of prevention as adults, being adults, is paying attention to those situations, so that you can eventually, hopefully, give a person who's in that situation an opportunity to get out. And then the other thing is, the other big overarching thing I want to get across is, as adults, we have a huge opportunity to instill in young people that they have worth and value. And their worth and value has nothing to do with anything that they do or anything that they experience. Their worth and value comes from the fact that they're made in God's image and that Christ came for them because he loves them. He wants them to find their identity in him, not in something that they've experienced or done. As I share I'm going to share a little bit about my story, but then also kind of recapping principles for you. Keep it all in that context, because it's really easy when, again, we're trying to help someone or protect someone that the messages don't come across from that perspective, even if that's our intent. Everything needs to be layered with, you have worth and value, and that's why, you can be respected, you can have boundaries, you can, get out of your situation and work that. So I'm going to actually start a little bit with my own story. I grew up about 30 minutes north of here in what most people consider a pretty safe environment. My family was, my parents were together, they were great. I was homeschooled, we were very connected with our church. But when I was in high school, I started dating this guy from youth group. And he and I had probably what we would consider the perfect Christian dating relationship start off. Where we were friends first, we did worship team together, we went on mission trips together, everything was great. And about 6 months in, stuff started to change. And I couldn't really put my finger on what it was, so it was kind of all messy. Being young and in love, we want to make everything work. What I didn't know at the time was that he was starting to verbally and emotionally abuse me. And at that time, people had talked to me about extreme forces of abuse. So rape, battering, or kind of these extreme things I would think of, and not really ever talk about like verbal abuse or emotional abuse or any of these kind of stickier situations that happen. And so I was in this relationship and I didn't really know what was going on. I was trying to make it work. He just seemed moody. He would go from degrading me and disrespecting me to, being really sweet all of a sudden. I didn't really know how to navigate all of this. just wanted to make this work. So here you go. So what happened was a woman in my life, she noticed, and she asked me to go out to coffee one day, and we spent a little coffee date, just chatting about life. And then she proceeded to tell me her story. And she had been in a previous marriage that was abusive. And so she kind of told me a little bit about that relationship and what it was like for her. And then she told me, she's like, I know that you really care about your boyfriend. I don't know everything that's going on with your relationship. You know that best. I don't know that best. But I just want you to have these resources for you, and I want you to at least read them. Just read them and decide what you want to do with this information. And the first sheet she gave me detailed what emotional abuse was and described it for me. And then the second sheet was a list of questions to ask myself or anyone to ask themselves to kind of assess the relationship to figure out if it was emotionally abusive. So I took it home, I read it. I did not have like this great epiphany all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, this is what's going on in my life, and I'm just going to break up with him, like we're done. It doesn't happen that way. But she planted a seed for me that I started to kind of reevaluate our relationship. And it took quite a few months before we actually did break up. And by that time, my self-esteem and self-worth was really down. And there's a lot of other things going on in life too that just kind of amplifies all of those things. But I still credit her for planting that seed, because I believe that if she hadn't, who knows what that relationship could have eventually turned to, something more extreme, or what kind of relationship I could have gotten into after that. So I kind of give you that context in talking about kind of these principles, and I'll draw a little bit on my story, but these principles that I'm sharing with you aren't just for my own experience. They're also from walking with a lot of survivors who had way, I guess you would consider more extreme stories in their lives. I've had friends who were sexually abused when they were kids, sexually abused by boyfriends, raped, trafficked, etc. And through our relationships and walking through their healing journeys have kind of gleaned some things as well as to what they wish people kind of would have done, or what situations they, looking back, if they would have had certain circumstances, maybe it would have helped. Obviously, they wouldn't have solved everything, but there's still things we can do. So the first one is cultivating trust. And there's two sides to this. The first one is a trusting adult-youth relationship. And it's easy to take this for granted because you're like, well, yeah, young people need trusting adults in their lives. They need a mentor, like, duh. But I want you to kind of go with me for a second what a young person would consider a trusting relationship. Because when I talk to young people, it is hard sometimes for them to articulate who that person could be in their life. And the biggest reason is because a lot of adult youth relationships seem conditional. If I get good grades, if I abstain from sex, if I don't do drugs, then everything's cool. If I dabble in anything that's not going to meet those expectations, then all of a sudden, whoa, there's consequences, etc. There's some sort of the shoe's going to drop somehow. And so coming to adults with things that you might be struggling with, doesn't always feel safe. I have a hard time sometimes figuring out who is that person that's not going to immediately judge me or jump to conclusions if I bring up a topic. John Cho also mentioned sexuality. It's true. Sex and dating relationships are one of those areas that a young person will more likely go to a peer than they'll go to an adult to have a conversation. And so cultivating spaces where if a topic does come up, there's not an immediate reaction. Physical reaction, even if you're not saying something, because your body language says a lot as well. The other side of that too is it's really easy for any of us who are adults, okay, we have more experience than a young person. And so they're like, something kind of gets brought up casually or seriously, and it's easy to jump, well, okay, here's what you need to do. Like, here's how you can solve that situation, here's how to fix it. And a lot of young people, that is sometimes helpful in certain situations, but when trying to think of a trusting relationship where they can actually wrestle through things, that's not necessarily what they're looking for. Especially thinking about teenagers, they're trying to start figuring out how to make decisions for themselves. So, prodding with questions, not in an interrogating way, but, just helping them, they're trying to figure out a relationship that they're in, asking them questions to kind of help them articulate and think through, like, how can I handle this situation, rather than just giving them the solution to what's going on. And obviously still using your experience. Go back to my story. The woman was vulnerable with me. She shared what her experience was. Now, she didn't say we were going through the same thing. She never said to me, you're in an abusive relationship. She never directly did anything of that sort, or put any sort of expectations out there that, like, if you don't do this, then it's going to become this, like, huge, big thing. Or if you don't consider this, I'm going to go tell your parents, or whatever it is. So it was a really safe space, and then she gave me the information and gave me the power to decide how to use that information in the situation that I was in. Kind of the flip side of all of this, so in the context, hopefully, of a trusting relationship as an adult to a young person where they have a safe space where they can kind of wrestle through things, is actually helping them figure out what does trust look like. So, they need to be able to start articulating what does a trusting relationship look like, whether it's with a peer, whether it's with a romantic relationship, whether it's with another adult. What does trust look like? My mentor even keeps bugging me on that now. Like, how do you describe trust? Like, I was in a conflict with someone, and like, okay, so what about that makes you feel like they've broken your trust? And kind of putting words to those emotions that seem intangible, and it's hard to figure out, it's hard to assess, and it's hard to ask critical questions to figure out what's really going on. So kind of guiding that process. Another thing too is talking a lot about boundaries. Boundaries are healthy. If you do, and this is one of those hand-pulling things, if you Google anything around dating violence or domestic violence or sexual violence prevention, they'll talk about consent and this concept of consent. I was recently reading an article from, I don't remember where it's from actually, but two parents about how to teach consent to toddlers. You can start this really young. And what they're doing is, these parents that wrote the article, instead of just taking a hug from their toddler, they ask them first, can I have a hug? And if the toddler says no, they don't take a hug. Because if they take a hug after they said no, that's telling the toddler their no doesn't matter. It's not going to be respected. And so later on in life, and this is a consistent thing that happens, later on in life, with the boyfriend or the coach or whoever is starting to push their boundaries a little bit, they don't have as much confidence that their no is going to mean anything or should be respected. Just something else to kind of consider thinking about teaching young people how to develop trust and what trust looks like and what respect looks like. And then, of course, obviously, it's good to help young people understand what kind of situations it makes sense to include an adult. Young people, as they're trying to build trust with each other, is obviously keeping secrets and not being able to be vulnerable with each other, etc. But helping them understand, when it is a situation where they really should go to an adult and let them know. I was talking with a young person I was talking at a youth group, and I was talking about different things I'm going to get into in a second about safety planning, and she's like, okay, so this is what my friend and I do. Is this what you need? And I was like, yes. She's like, okay, I know now what I can do with myself, but what do I do about my friend? And I said, well, first you should talk to her. Just be upfront, like, please, this isn't a safe situation. I think we should stop doing this. And give her the power to first make that choice. But there were other adults, she was a minor, there was other adults involved. Like, also go to someone, a trusting adult who's going to handle the situation without freaking out, without, making it a huge deal. But that is something that particular situation, she was getting in unsafe situations with people who were not minors, that it's worth going to an adult about and kind of explaining it from that context. That your friend's worth enough that it's going to feel like a betrayal, but it's better that you do that than her end up getting in. We were talking about sex trafficking at that time, but in a situation where she might get trafficked, which was very clear line for that situation at that time. So the second big principle is around awareness and engaging in what I call the fight. So whether it's sex trafficking, sexual violence or abuse, whatever it is, getting young people engaged in awareness and fight against those things. Again, going back to my own story, people had talked to me about, rape and battery, these extreme versions, but also, I would encourage you to not just raise awareness on those, also talk about things like verbal and emotional abuse. Because verbal and emotional abuse, and I'm not going to go into all the tactics because at the hour I would, that recruiters use to kind of groom their victims before they ever turn a trick in a sex trafficking situation, or even just abusers in general, leading to like a more violent behavior. They will use verbal and emotional abuse first, kind of degrade the victim. They're feeling like they don't have self-esteem, self-worth. They're not to be respected. They don't deserve respect, etc. So having a conversation with young people and helping them identify what is emotional abuse like, how can they this list of questions and answers. If you Google anything on those things, you can find those list of questions for a person to ask themselves. But that's a perfect place for prevention to happen, is in that kind of more sticky situations. It's easier to identify the more extreme versions of it. It's harder to kind of see all of the roads that happened before. And then just one other thing on awareness, another topic, and I know they're doing a breakout session on it, is pornography. But talking about pornography, I was reading recent research in a study, and they're still saying that the average age that someone sees pornography for the first time is 11. Pretty sure it's probably closer to 8 now with mobile devices and everything. And pornography is addicting. It's as addicting as heroin is. And so you have these 8-year-olds who are coming across pornography and then becoming addicted to it, and that's shaping their view of how relationships look. On both ends of it. Both as, perhaps this is putting gender norms in there, but as a female, that, she should be treated this way, and as a male, that this is how we treat women. So having honest conversations around pornography but within the context, again, of worth and value and not shaming and not, just stop if it's wrong, kind of approaches, again, recognizing that it is incredibly addicting and they need to have, if a young person's struggling with that, they need real help in how to break free from that addiction rather than just told it's wrong, you need to stop, sort of thing. Great resources for that. Fight the New Drug is an organization in California specifically targeting young people on this topic. It's very comprehensive. They have tons of tools. They're awesome. So I encourage you to look at that.
What was the name of it?
Fight the New Drug. And then the last principle is safety planning. These are kind of some tangible stuff for you. So when I talk to young people on any of these topics, one of the first things I tell them is don't ever put yourself in a situation where you don't have control. Perfect examples are getting in cars with friends' friends or going to a house with friends' friends. Situations where they can't get out if they're starting to feel uncomfortable. Or if they are going to go to a party, developing a safety plan with them. So if they're starting to feel uncomfortable and they need to get out quickly, what's the plan for that? Are you going to go pick them up? Where can they go if they just leave? How can they develop that safety plan without it being reliant on their peers? And then these sort of professionals, it's not like, well, then just ask your friend to drive you somewhere that don't have it be that way, be more reliant on a trusting adult. Having a safe word. So, a young person may not feel comfortable saying, like, can you come pick me up on the phone or texting that while they're in a group setting, but there might be a word that you've agreed on. If there's like, I really want brownies, then that's the cue to you that you need to go get them, but then it's not making it obvious to the rest of the people who are in the group that person's been uncomfortable and wants to leave. My mom always told me that I could use her as a cop-out. Like, my mom's saying I need to go home now. So, those are great ways to go about it. And then online and social media safety. Obviously, one of the biggest kind of areas that recruiters are using is online and through social media to find victims, like potential victims. So having real conversations about online safety. Don't give out your personal information to people that you don't really know that much or that well, or as a friend of a friend, or you only met once. You're being careful about those kind of things. Don't check in places. That is, like, there's a lot of apps and Facebook where you can put where you are physically when you post. Talk about how that's basically creating a map for anyone who has access can find out exactly where you hang out. Whenever you're where you're hanging out, where you're hanging out right now, where you might be hanging out with friends. It's very obvious that you're just with a whole bunch of other kids and there's not an adult around. So, look, I'm going to go over there. The recruiter, it's kind of a perfect, direct avenue. And then being careful about apps and websites that promise that the information is confidential and deleted, or will delete. Snapchat, for example. Snapchat can be used very well. It can be a fun thing. But remind young people that, person can take a screenshot of whatever you put on Snapchat and keep it and forward it on to however many people they want to. I heard a story once of a young girl who was in a situation where her boyfriend kind of pressured her to take a suggested photo of herself and send it to him because he wanted it. She eventually did that. He then forwarded it on to, all of his friends who forwarded it on, etc. Now, her parents eventually found out about this, and I'm going to go back to how this connects to trusting relationship. Rather than freak out at her for taking that photo, which would have been maybe the reaction that a lot of people would have right away. There was a question, did you feel like you had to do this? Did you feel pressured into doing this? You're worth more than that. You're worth being respected. Your boundaries, boundaries and your privacy, and that should have been more respected than it was, and it wasn't. And that put her in a position where she felt safe and empowered. She didn't feel judged. They still had an honest conversation. That wasn't smart. But instead of it becoming a conversation about how she made this mistake and it's all on her and it's her fault that she's in this situation, it was a conversation around, how can you be a little bit more, how can you be a little bit more smart, but then also your boundaries, and you should have been respected because you're worth that. And so finally, because I think I'm technically over, I just want to go back to that first piece on worth and value. One of the people that I'm listening to right now, her name is Brene Brown, and she talks a lot about the difference between shame and guilt. And guilt is, I made a mistake. I've made a mistake. unless I can, make a different choice next time. Shame is I am the mistake. There's something wrong with me. So when you're talking with young people about some of these hard things, and especially anything where they made, in your mind, they made a dumb choice, being careful about how you talk about that topic so that they aren't feeling the shame piece, because that will naturally come about, because that's exactly what Satan wants to do, obviously. He wants us to see ourselves as worthless. We aren't worth being forgiven. We're not worth being respected. We're not worth this. But we know from the gospel that that's not what the gospel message is. That we have worth and value, and Christ wants to give us more of that worth and value by us identifying with Him. So I'm going to leave with this final analogy that I heard. A speaker once had a $100 bill. He asked the crowd who wanted it, and everyone, of course, wanted it. Then he said, he crumpled it up, put it on the ground, stomped on it, poured coffee on it, said, it was used to buy drugs, it was used to buy sex. Who still wants it? Everyone still wanted it. It was still a $100 bill. And they drew that conclusion, or that connection for them. It didn't matter what the dollar bill had been used for, what it experienced. Its worth and value still was determined by the U.S. Treasury. And so us as human beings, despite what we experience, these some dumb choices that we make, our worth and value is found in the fact that we were made in God's image, and that through the gospel, through Christ, that we have that worth and value, and it doesn't rely on those things. So just when you're thinking about talking with young people on any of these topics, that message alone goes so much farther than really anything else. That's all I have. I'll take questions. I'm technically older, so you guys can go to lunch if you want to, but